Hey, thanks for clicking on the video. Today, I'm gonna say something I never really thought I'd say. I'm in love with the trace rifle. Now, I know that sounds a bit ridiculous, but the trace rifle's god roll we're reviewing today is actually just that good. Between that and the new sandbox tools we have access to, I promise Unsworn can turn a trace hater into a trace lover, or at least not as much of a hater. Also, before we get into the video, there are timestamps down below, and if you find this video helpful at any point, a subscription would be greatly appreciated. So to begin, I'd first like to mention that this trace drops from the Sundered Doctrine dungeon in all the encounters, and don't forget you can do the focus chest too if you've got the Finalities Augur Catalyst. But now to actually get into the review, we've got the perks. In its third column, we have Tear, Rewind Rounds, Subsistence, Shoot to Loot, Thresh, and Stats for All. Then in column 4, it has Target Lock, Killing Tally, Detonator Beam, Hatchling, Elemental Honing, and Bait and Switch. And then notably, it also has the Subjugation Origin trait, which is very, very good. We'll have a whole section about this later in the video. But with our attention on the third column first, I think Tear, Rewind Rounds, and Shoot to Loot are most intriguing. Now starting with Tear, this is a new strand-specific perk that acts as a source of Sever, but I'm bringing it up actually to recommend against it. This is a perk that acts like Dragonfly, but rather than AoE damage, it's a severing explosion. Now while it's good on paper, and I love Sever, high RPM weapons don't behave the best when you need precision kills. And Unsworn and other trace rifles will run into similar issues. If Tear was on regular kills and activated like Incandescent, this would be a totally different story. But that's not the case. Now, the other two perks are ammo and reload based, and we'll first talk about Rewind Rounds. This is a pretty classic perk that helps on the reload side of things. Now what you're seeing isn't an Unsworn, but it is the same functionality. With Rewind Rounds, you can just kind of shoot forever. Going from target to target or staying on one big guy, you can just unload much more than a full mag. While this perk is cracked on a weapon like Queenbreaker, which is good for damage, is it so good on a trace rifle? I say not really. Which takes us to the last perk, and one that I absolutely adore on this weapon and in this sandbox, which it's Shoot to Loot. Very self-explanatory, you can shoot orbs and bricks to collect them, with ammo reloading all of your weapons. Now I'm gonna go ahead and say it, Shoot to Loot is easily the best perk in this column, but the reasoning for this isn't immediately obvious. There are so many synergies that exist right now that make this trace feel like an exotic, and Shoot to Loot is necessary for those, but we'll talk about that in a second. For now, we gotta move on to the fourth column. Target Lock, Detonator Beam, and Hatchling are what I'm picking here. Target Lock is an option here due to the possible pairing of Rewind Rounds plus Target Lock, which allows Target Lock to max out its damage bonus pretty easily. But like I said earlier, are you gonna use this trace for DPS? I hope not. As for the other perks, I wanna look at Hatchling first. This is another standard perk, but it's more so for all those wanting strand investment on their weapons. The perk works off of 3 kills or a precision kill, but like I said, precision kills on high RPM weapons is pretty unreliable. Now I do like Hatchling a lot, but I think during this episode, we can go with the last perk I wanted to talk about in the fourth column, that being Detonator Beam. This is another new perk with this episode, and reads, dealing sustained damage creates an explosion around the target. In game, we can see these activating at Karo after 20 hits. This is actually an effect of enhanced Detonator Beam, as the standard perk will take 25 hits. But when we do proc this explosion, it'll deal about 10,000 damage, and considering our normal shots deal 1,000 to 2,000, whenever this explosion procs, it's like we just fired around 10 more bullets instantly. This perk will also activate even if we hit separate targets. Really, just think about this perk like kinetic trimmers, but for trace rifles. And I do want to emphasize, this perk is fantastic. When that explosion goes off, you get increased single target damage while also hitting anything near that target. It truly is the perfect perk, as rank and file enemies and generally everything gets more tanky as you enter the end game. I also want to point out that the explosion from Detonator Beam does synergize with Shoot to Loot, and the ramifications of that will become clear again in just a moment. The last thing though that I need to bring attention to before we discuss the god roll and the synergies that exist for Unsworn is the Subjugation Origin trait. This is easily one of the stronger origin traits in the game and reads, weapon adapts to targets. When dealing damage to weak targets, shots explode. To strong targets, targets become exhausted, and then you get flinch resist against guardians. Now uniquely, this origin trait gives every weapon that has it intrinsic explosive payload to their shots against red and orange bars. Now it isn't a one-to-one comparison of the actual perk, because could you imagine explosive payload on every trace rifle tick? How it works here is that you'll get this damage number for about 700 every 4 ticks. So you do get a good amount of extra damage when it does proc, but it doesn't proc all the time. As for the other effect, it lowers yellow bars and above's output damage by 10%. Now then, the god roll, I've pretty much stated it already, but my god roll is definitely shoot to loot plus detonator beam. I do want to highlight rewind rounds plus target lock as an alright option. Granted, please don't use this for any standard type of DPS. And then hatchling is another particularly good perk that may be your go-to if you like threadling builds. But the synergy that exists between shoot to loot and detonator beam is just too damn powerful this episode. Shoot to loot is great on its own, detonator beam is great on its own, but together they make Unsworn feel like an exotic weapon. And a big reason for that is within episode Heresy's artifact. I cannot lie, without the artifact, Unsworn isn't going to be as good. But seeing as we'll have this artifact for a few more months, I say we make the most of it. So to begin here, I'm not even going to start talking about the trace specific perks added in Act 2. The main contributors for making Unsworn feel so good are Unraveling Orbs and Horde Shuttle. Unraveling Orbs is massive because it gives us unraveling rounds on orb pickup. This gives us more damage and anti-barrier capabilities. But since this perk activates on picking up an orb, you can see how the god roll of shoot to loot plus detonator beam is so good here. You can aim and click on an orb or just use the gun like normal and the detonator beam is gonna pick up the orb for you. This combo makes it so easy to keep unraveling rounds up perpetually. And then immediately synergizing with that, Horde Shuttle causes unraveled enemies to spawn threadlings. And pretty much every enemy hit by this thing is going to get unraveled. So as you can imagine, that's a lot of threadlings. But then yes, the synergies don't come close to ending there. This unravel that we're getting from Unraveling Orbs is important for the next best artifact perk, being Harsh Refraction. This reads, Trace Rifles do more damage to targets afflicted by elemental debuffs matching their element type. And the damage increase for this? Well, we can see it. Our shots go from 1600 per crit to 2400 per crit. That's a 50% increase. And because we always have unraveling rounds active, thanks to Unraveling Orbs, that's 50% damage to everything, which this more than makes up for Trace Rifle's intrinsic low damage output, which is most people and my main complaint. And then the last kind of gameplay changing perk is Beam Medic, that will just restore a chunk of HP when getting about 3 kills. The restoration you're seeing isn't from Beam Medic, that would just be my subclass doing that. But then lastly, where the artifact is involved, we have Overload Trace and Deep Alchemy. Deep Alchemy doesn't do a whole lot. We can make use of it, causing this weapon to be overcharged for a free plus 25% damage when in activities with that modifier. And then where Overload is concerned, just consciously choose if you want Unsworn to handle overloads, because overload traces will override Unraveling Round's piercing effects, so make sure you decide which champion you want Unsworn to take care of before you start an activity. But now, with that metric ton of synergy considered, Unsworn is quite literally the perfect trace this season. This god roll and those artifact perks make a weapon that I never would have used, to be honest, into one that truly feels powerful. I 100% recommend you guys get out there and farm some Sundered Doctrine to feel this yourself. Because again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is the type of trace rifle that can turn a hater into someone that actually likes running it. And I myself am one of those people. And with that, I think that's everything I wanted to say. Thank you so much for getting this far into the video. Your viewership means an absolute ton. Down in the comments, let me know what you think about this trace rifle, or maybe just trace rifles in general. They're kind of on the up and up with this season's artifact. But outside of that, if you want to support me, support the channel, a like, a comment, a subscription goes a very long way. If you want to support me and support the channel, but you can't think of a comment down below, Unsworn. And with that, as usual, I hope you are having a great day, and I hope to see you around.